July 14, 1942, Benghazi, Libya. Oberst Werner Marcks stood in the captured British motor pool staring at a vehicle that made him laugh out loud. The Americans called it a jeep. It looked like a motorized toy. Compared to the elegant Kübelwagen his regiment relied on, this squat little machine seemed absurdly crude. Flat fenders, exposed engine, a body so simple a child could have sketched it. Marcks wrote in his daily report, "The American quarter-ton truck appears to be built by men who have never seen proper engineering. It is heavy where it should be light, simple where it should be sophisticated. I estimate its battlefield utility at approximately 0. 3 months later, Oberst Marcks would be dead. Killed while trying to escape in a captured jeep that had carried him 240 kilometers through the desert without failing once. By war's end, German forces had captured over 15,000 jeeps. They coveted them more than any other piece of American equipment. Interviewing Wehrmacht generals after their surrender, U.S. Army historian Hugh Cole discovered something remarkable. These men admired the Jeep more than anything else in the entire American arsenal, more than the M4 Sherman, more than the M1 Garand, more than American artillery. This is the story of how German officers laughed at a vehicle they called the motorized donkey, until it crossed every battlefield in ways that no other vehicle in history ever had. The engineering philosophy they dismissed. Summer 1940, the United States wasn't even in the war yet. But American military planners understood something that would prove decisive. Modern warfare wasn't about horses anymore. World War I had proven that harsh lesson in the mud of France, where thousands of horses drowned in shell craters and became hopelessly mired in terrain that vehicles could navigate. The U.S. Army put together a commission in June 1940 to study one specific question: what kind of light vehicle could replace horses, motorcycles, and reconnaissance cars? The requirement seemed impossible: weight under 1,300 pounds initially, though this would be relaxed to 2,160 pounds. Four-wheel drive for cross-country travel, payload capacity of 600 pounds, capable of carrying a light machine gun, maximum simplicity for field repair. On June 27, 1940, the Quartermaster Corps sent bid invitations to 135 American automotive manufacturers. The deadline was brutally tight, prototype plans due in less than 1 month. Only 2 companies responded. American Bantam, a tiny Pennsylvania firm flirting with bankruptcy, and Willis Overland, another struggling manufacturer. Both were desperate, both were small. Both built 4-cylinder vehicles when the American market demanded big V8 engines. American Bantam moved first. They hired engineer Karl Probst and gave him just 5 days to complete detailed blueprints for a vehicle that didn't exist yet. Probst worked 18-hour days. On July 22, 1940, Bantam submitted complete prototype plans by the deadline. The Army awarded them a contract for 70 test vehicles. But the Army had a problem. Bantam was too small to mass-produce vehicles if war came, so they did something controversial. They shared Bantam's blueprints with Willys Overland and Ford Motor Company. Willys brought one critical advantage to the competition: their Go Devil engine, a 134 cubic inch 4-cylinder flathead engine that generated 60 horsepower. It was 40% more powerful than Bantam's engine and more reliable than Ford's initial offerings. Ford brought manufacturing expertise that dwarfed both competitors. Their assembly line experience and massive production capacity made them essential for wartime production. By November 1940, all 3 companies had produced working prototypes: the Willys Quad, the Ford Pygmy, the Bantam BRC. Testing began at Camp Holabird, Maryland. The Army subjected these vehicles to punishment that would destroy ordinary cars, 60-degree hill climbs, fording streams, cross-country runs through mud, sand and snow, towing artillery pieces, operating continuously for 16 hours without maintenance. The Willys prototype outperformed the others in raw power and reliability. The Ford design offered better ergonomics and a stamped steel body that was cheaper to manufacture. The Bantam was lightest and most agile. The Army made a decision that would reshape automotive history. They combined the best features of all three designs into a single standardized vehicle: Willys's Go Devil engine for power, Ford's body design and iconic 7-slot grille for manufacturability, Bantam's four-wheel drive system for capability. In July 1941, Willys Overland received a contract to produce 16,000 units of the new MB model at $738.74 per vehicle. Ford received contracts to build the identical vehicle under the designation GPW, with the W indicating it was a Willys licensed design. Then came December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Everything changed. The Army immediately ordered production ramped to maximum capacity. Both Willys and Ford retooled their factories completely. By 1943, they were producing one Jeep every 90 seconds. The final production numbers were staggering. Willys built 363,000 MB models. Ford built 277,196 GPW models. Total production, 647,925 Jeeps in just 4 years. But here's what separated the Jeep from every other military vehicle. It wasn't just the quantity, it was the engineering philosophy. American engineers made deliberate choices that German engineers would have rejected as amateurish. Where the Kübelwagen emphasized lightness through a 1,597-pound curb weight and minimal engine power, just 23.5 horsepower initially, the Jeep accepted extra weight to gain capability. The MB weighed 2,453 pounds, but that extra 856 pounds brought four-wheel drive, a 60-horsepower engine, and payload capacity of 800 pounds. Where German engineers optimized for specific conditions, American engineers designed for universal adaptability. The Kübelwagen performed brilliantly in certain terrain, using its lightweight and flat underbelly to slide over snow and sand like a motorized sled. But it struggled with heavy loads, steep grades, and deep mud. The Jeep made different trade-offs: heavier frame for durability, stronger suspension for punishment, more powerful engine for towing and climbing, four-wheel drive for unstoppable traction. German officers looked at these specifications and saw waste. Why four-wheel drive when rear-wheel drive was cheaper and lighter? Why 60 horsepower when 25 was sufficient? Why such a heavy frame when clever design could reduce weight? They fundamentally misunderstood what American engineers had created. The Jeep wasn't optimized for any specific task. It was optimized for every task simultaneously. And when German soldiers actually encountered Jeeps on the battlefield, that distinction would become devastatingly clear. The first encounters, November 8, 1942, Operation Torch. American and British forces landed in Morocco and Algeria. German intelligence officers in North Africa received their first detailed reports about American equipment. Hauptmann Friedrich Ziegler, an intelligence analyst attached to the Africa Corps, compiled an assessment of American motor vehicles observed at Casablanca. His report, dated November 14, 1942, described the Jeep with barely concealed contempt. The American quarter-ton reconnaissance vehicle lacks the refined engineering of our Kübelwagen. It is 16 centimeters longer, yet 388 kilograms heavier. The four-wheel drive system adds unnecessary mechanical complexity. Maximum speed approximately 105 kilometers per hour versus our vehicle's 130 kilometers per hour. Assessment: American industrial capacity applied toward inferior design. Our troops should prioritize capture of fuel and ammunition over these vehicles. Ziegler's assessment reflected the consensus among German officers who had spent 3 years fighting in North Africa. They knew terrain. They understood desert warfare. They had seen countless vehicles fail in conditions where the Kübelwagen thrived. The Kübelwagen's flat underbelly allowed it to slide over soft sand like a sled. Its lightweight meant it rarely became bogged down. Its air-cooled engine eliminated radiator vulnerabilities in desert heat. Its simplicity made field repairs straightforward. Why would anyone design a heavier, more complex vehicle with a water-cooled engine that could overheat? It seemed to violate every principle of desert engineering. Then came the night of July 26, 1942, the raid on Sidi Hanish airfield. British Special Air Service Major David Stirling had developed a new tactic. Instead of infiltrating German airfields on foot, his unit would storm them in vehicles. But not trucks, jeeps, 18 jeeps carrying 3 to 4 commandos, each navigated 80 kilometers through the desert in complete darkness. Each jeep mounted 4 Vickers K machine guns, rapid-firing weapons originally designed for aircraft use. The German Luftwaffe airfield at Sidi Hanish, 378 kilometers west of Cairo, sat vulnerable in the moonlight. German troops had grown accustomed to static defenses and slow-moving Allied attacks. At precisely 01:45 hours, Major Stirling fired a green flare. 18 jeeps roared onto the airfield in V formation at full speed. What happened next rewrote the textbook on mobile warfare. The jeeps didn't stop to fire. They raced through the parked aircraft at 80 kilometers per hour, gunners firing tracer ammunition into every target. Junkers Ju-87 Stukas, Junkers Ju-52 transports, Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters. The Germans retaliated with machine guns and anti-aircraft weapons. They disabled one jeep and killed Lance Bombardier John Robson. But they couldn't stop the attack. In less than 15 minutes, the SAS destroyed or damaged 37 German aircraft. The jeeps vanished into the desert before German reinforcements could organize a pursuit. Oberst Hans-Joachim Marseille, one of Germany's top fighter aces stationed nearby, wrote in his diary, "We face a new problem. The British have learned to bring firepower to us faster than we can respond. Their American jeeps move like our motorcycles, but carry the armament of an armored car. This is problematic." That was July. By October, British 8th Army Commander Bernard Montgomery was preparing for the Second Battle of El Alamein. Montgomery understood something about the jeep that German commanders hadn't grasped yet. It wasn't just a reconnaissance vehicle, it was a platform for tactical innovation. Montgomery equipped jeep columns with extra fuel and water in jerry cans. He mounted 50 caliber Browning machine guns. He sent them deep behind German lines to attack supply convoys. On the night of October 24, 1942, as Montgomery's 600-gun barrage signaled the start of El Alamein, jeep-mounted raiding parties were already operating 100 kilometers behind Rommel's front lines. They targeted fuel convoys carrying gasoline for Rommel's panzers. The tactics were devastatingly simple. Small jeep formations, typically 3 to 5 vehicles, would hide during daylight, camouflaged in wadis and depressions. At night, they'd move to interception points along known supply routes. When fuel trucks appeared, the jeeps would attack at high speed from multiple directions. German supply officer Hauptmann Otto Schulz documented one such attack in his after-action report, dated November 3, 1942. At approximately 00:30 hours, our convoy of 18 fuel trucks came under attack from an estimated 12 to 15 enemy vehicles. Attack lasted approximately 4 minutes. Enemy vehicles approached at high speed, fired incendiary rounds into trucks, and departed before our escort could respond effectively. Result? 14 fuel trucks destroyed, 4 damaged, 73,000 liters of fuel lost. Enemy casualties? Unknown, likely 0. Our casualties? 11 dead, 19 wounded. Schultz added a note that his superiors dismissed as defeatist. We cannot defend against attacks that conclude before we can deploy countermeasures. Enemy mobility exceeds our capacity to respond. By November 4, 1942, Rommel had lost most of his tanks and more than 30,000 men at El Alamein. But the fuel situation was equally catastrophic. British jeep raids and air attacks on supply ships had reduced available fuel to critical levels. Rommel began his retreat west across Libya, and that's when German soldiers started understanding what the jeep really was. The Versatility, the revelation across every terrain. December 1942, the long retreat across Libya. German and Italian forces withdrew over 2,000 kilometers from El Alamein to Tunisia. Gefreiter Hans Möller had served with the Afrika Korps since 1941. He'd driven Kübelwagens through every type of desert terrain. He considered himself an expert on vehicle performance in North Africa. On December 18, 1942, his unit captured 3 American jeeps abandoned by Free French forces near El Agheila. Müller's commander ordered him to evaluate them for possible use. Müller's initial assessment was scathing. The vehicles are excessively heavy, the four-wheel drive system is overly complex, fuel consumption is poor. I estimate these vehicles have limited utility. But Müller was a practical soldier. His unit's Kübelwagens were worn out after 18 months of desert service. Parts were unavailable, fuel was scarce, so he tested the captured jeeps. What he discovered changed his assessment completely. First test, deep sand. Müller drove a Kübelwagen through a sand dune field, then repeated the route in a jeep. The Kübelwagen performed as expected, sliding over soft sand, using momentum and light weight to maintain progress. The jeep plowed through the same terrain, but with a crucial difference. When it hit deep sand, all 4 wheels pulled. It didn't slide, it clawed forward with relentless traction. Müller noted, "The American vehicle does not finesse terrain, it overpowers it." Second test, rocky wadis. The Kübelwagen had to navigate carefully, avoiding sharp rocks that could puncture its thin floor pan. The jeep simply drove over obstacles that would have damaged the German vehicle. Müller measured ground clearance, 22 centimeters on the jeep versus 18 centimeters on the Kübelwagen. The stronger suspension and frame absorbed impacts that would have broken the lighter vehicle. Third test, payload. Müller loaded both vehicles with captured British ammunition crates. The Kübelwagen's suspension sagged under 300 kilograms. The jeep carried 360 kilograms without visible strain. Müller revised his assessment. Initial judgment was incorrect. The American vehicle's extra weight is not waste, it is capability. The jeep can do things our vehicle cannot. Request permission to retain captured vehicles for operational use. His commander approved the request. Within weeks, Müller's unit was operating more captured jeeps than German vehicles. This pattern repeated across every theater of war. German soldiers who actually used jeeps became converts. France and the jeep's unstoppable advance. June 6, 1944. D-Day, Normandy beaches. Jeeps came ashore in the first waves of the invasion. They drove directly off landing craft into waist-deep water. The four-wheel drive pulled them through beach sand and up the seawalls. Obergefreiter Anton Richter watched the Normandy landings from a defensive position overlooking Utah Beach. His diary entry from June 6, 1944. The Americans brought their jeeps in the first assault waves. This seems insane. Why waste cargo space on light vehicles when you need tanks and artillery? Richter's question reflected standard German military doctrine. Heavy equipment wins battles. Light vehicles serve support roles. But within 24 hours, Richter understood. The Jeeps weren't support vehicles. They were force multipliers. American commanders used Jeeps to move rapidly across the battlefield in ways German forces couldn't match. Radio-equipped Jeeps established mobile command posts. Artillery forward observers directed fire from Jeep-mounted positions. Medical evacuation teams reached wounded soldiers in Jeeps modified to carry stretchers. Supply officers ran ammunition to frontline positions in Jeeps, towing small trailers. By June 10th, Richter's unit had been cut off from their supply depot by American forces. He wrote, "The Americans are everywhere simultaneously. Their Jeeps move faster than our motorcycles and carry more than our trucks. They appear behind our lines, deliver supplies or evacuate wounded, and disappear before we can respond. This is impossible, yet it happens constantly." The Battle of St. Lo in July 1944 proved Richter's observations on a larger scale. American forces needed to break through German defenses that had stalled the Normandy campaign. Major General Charles Corlett, commanding the 19th Corps, devised a tactic that exploited Jeep mobility. He equipped Jeep squadrons with extra radios and sent them probing German defensive positions across a 40-kilometer front. Instead of committing infantry to find weak points, the Jeeps raced toward German lines, drew fire, and radioed back defensive strength and positions. German defenders faced a dilemma. If they fired on the Jeeps, they revealed their positions to American artillery forward observers. If they held fire, the Jeeps penetrated closer, gathering more detailed intelligence. Feldwebel Kurt Steiner commanded a machine gun position near St. Lo. His after-action report described the tactic. "American Jeeps approached our position at high speed. We held fire, hoping they would pass. They stopped 200 meters away. Observers began radiating coordinates. We opened fire. Jeeps departed immediately. 3 minutes later, American artillery struck our position with precision. We suffered 60% casualties. The Jeeps never fired a shot. They simply identified us for destruction." This pattern repeated across the St. Lo sector. Jeeps identified defensive positions. Artillery destroyed them. Infantry advanced through the gaps. German commanders couldn't counter the tactic effectively. Their Kübelwagens couldn't match Jeep speed and were too valuable to risk in reconnaissance-by-fire missions. Their motorcycles were faster but couldn't carry radio equipment and observers. By July 25th, when Operation Cobra, the massive breakout from Normandy, began, American forces had detailed maps of German defensive positions. Jeeps had provided most of that intelligence, and when the breakout came, Jeeps led the advance. Armored columns raced across France with Jeep-mounted reconnaissance teams ranging miles ahead, finding routes around German defenses, calling in airstrikes on strongpoints, guiding tank columns through optimal terrain. General George S. Patton's Third Army advanced 600 miles in 30 days during August and September 1944. Jeeps running ahead of the armor made that speed possible. Hauptmann Wolfgang Becker, a staff officer with the German 5th Panzer Army, wrote in September 1944, "We cannot predict where American forces will attack next because their reconnaissance moves faster than our intelligence can process it. By the time we confirm American Jeeps in an area, their tanks are already attacking. The Jeep gives them a tempo advantage we cannot match." GC, The Battle of the Bulge and German Desperation. December 1944, the Ardennes Forest. Hitler launched Germany's last major offensive in the West. And for this offensive, he wanted Jeeps. SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny received unusual orders in October 1944. Create a special brigade to penetrate American lines during the upcoming offensive, equip them with captured American uniforms, weapons, and vehicles, especially jeeps. Operation Griffin was Hitler's brainchild. German soldiers speaking English would infiltrate American lines in captured jeeps, sowing confusion and capturing bridges before they could be destroyed. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht issued an order on October 25, 1944, requesting captured American equipment. 15 tanks, 20 armored cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, 120 trucks. The emphasis on jeeps was telling. Of all the captured American equipment, jeeps were considered most essential. But German forces couldn't find 100 captured jeeps, despite 2 years of fighting American forces, despite capturing thousands of vehicles, despite the ubiquity of jeeps across every battlefield. They could only locate 30. Why? Because every German unit that captured a jeep kept it. Wehrmacht regulations required captured vehicles to be turned in for redistribution. But commanders routinely forgot to report captured jeeps, hiding them from higher headquarters and using them for their own unit's needs. Skorzony's men did their best with what they had. They painted German vehicles in American olive drab. They disguised Panther tanks as M10 tank destroyers with sheet metal. And they treasured their 30 actual jeeps as the most valuable assets in the operation. On December 16, 1944, the German offensive began. Skorzony's infiltrators, traveling in teams of 4 to 6 men, drove their jeeps behind American lines. Some got through. A few actually reached their objectives. But here's what Skorzeny discovered. The jeep was so common in American service that his disguised German soldiers were constantly stopped by American MPs and logistics officers who assumed any jeep was an American vehicle requiring coordination. American soldiers would flag down the jeeps to ask for directions. They'd request help moving equipment. They'd try to hitchhike. Skorzony's men, despite speaking fluent English, were repeatedly caught because they didn't know American slang, couldn't answer questions about baseball scores, and made simple mistakes that revealed they weren't actually Americans. 3 infiltrators, Unteroffizier Manfred Pernas, Oberfähnrich Günther Billing, and Gefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt, were captured when they failed to give the correct password at an American checkpoint. Under interrogation, they revealed Operation Greif's existence. The revelation caused massive disruption behind American lines, but not the disruption Germany intended. American forces became paranoid about German infiltrators. MPs set up checkpoints everywhere, demanding identification and asking questions only Americans could answer. General Dwight Eisenhower spent Christmas 1944 under guard, isolated because of rumors that Skorzony's men were targeting him for assassination. But the actual military impact of Operation Greif was minimal. Skorzony's brigade captured 0 bridges. Most infiltration teams were caught or killed. The operation failed completely. What succeeded was the paranoia it created. And that paranoia existed because the jeep was so ubiquitous that Germans driving them seemed plausible. Think about that. The jeep had become so fundamental to American military operations that German high command believed their best infiltration vehicle was an American jeep. Not a German vehicle disguised as American, an actual American jeep. Because nothing else could blend in as well. Nothing else had the same mobility. Nothing else was as universally trusted by American soldiers. The Eastern Front and Soviet desperation. November 1941, before America even entered the war, the Soviet Union received its first jeeps under the Lend-Lease program. Soviet forces were reeling from Operation Barbarossa. German armies had advanced hundreds of miles. Soviet infrastructure was collapsing. Motorized units were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. The first shipment included 3,650 jeeps. Soviet officers looked at these vehicles with deep skepticism. They had their own reconnaissance vehicles. The Gaz-64 was in development. Why did they need American jeeps? Then came the Russian mud season, Rasputitsa, the period when dirt roads become impassable swamps, when even tracked vehicles bog down, when movement becomes impossible, except for jeeps. American correspondent Henry Cassidy cabled from the Russian front. The American jeep has met the Russian mud, and the situation is well in hand. Soviet soldiers discovered what German soldiers were learning simultaneously. The jeep didn't care what you threw at it. Mud. The four-wheel drive pulled through. Snow. The narrow tires cut through to firm ground beneath. Frozen ground that would shatter suspension on other vehicles. The jeep's suspension absorbed the impacts. Soviet propagandists initially told the population that these vehicles were built in a secret Russian factory. But Soviet soldiers knew better. They called the jeep Uilis, their phonetic pronunciation of Willies. By 1943, over 51,000 jeeps had been shipped to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. Soviet forces used them everywhere: reconnaissance, artillery spotting, command vehicles, ammunition carriers, medical evacuation. But more importantly, they used them to maintain operational tempo that German forces couldn't match. Soviet offensives after 1943 moved faster and faster. German defensive positions that should have held were outflanked. Supply lines were maintained across terrain that should have been impassable. Part of that was Soviet tactical evolution. Part of it was growing German weakness, but part of it, a significant part, was the jeep. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, planning the massive offensives that would drive Germany from Soviet territory, relied on jeeps to maintain communication across his vast front. Radio-equipped jeeps allowed him to coordinate multiple army groups simultaneously. German intelligence officer Hauptmann Friedrich Hoffmann noted in March 1944, Soviet offensive operations now feature American vehicles in support roles throughout their formations. The mobility these vehicles provide allows Soviet forces to maintain supply and communication across broader fronts than our forces can effectively counter. We destroy Soviet tanks and artillery in battle, but their logistics network adapts faster than we can interdict it. American vehicles, particularly the ubiquitous Jeep, enable this adaptation. D&D, the Pacific and Jungle Warfare Guadalcanal. August 1942, Marines of the 1st Marine Division landed to capture Henderson Field. They brought jeeps in the first waves. The jeeps drove off landing craft, through surf, up coral beaches, and into jungle terrain that would destroy any ordinary vehicle. Japanese defenders had never seen anything like it. Their military doctrine emphasized light infantry, moving through jungle terrain on foot. They had motorcycles for reconnaissance on roads. They had trucks for supplies on established routes. But the Americans brought mobile firepower into the jungle itself. Jeeps mounting .50 caliber machine guns navigated trails that Japanese trucks couldn't traverse. Jeeps towing small artillery pieces positioned guns in locations Japanese forces thought were inaccessible to vehicles. Marine Brigadier General William Rupertus used jeeps to establish mobile command posts that moved with the front lines. He could direct artillery, call in air support, and coordinate maneuvers from a jeep equipped with radio equipment. One specific jeep, nicknamed Old Faithful, became famous. On October 13, 1942, Old Faithful received 2 shrapnel holes in its windshield during a Japanese naval bombardment of Henderson Field. The Marines awarded the jeep a Purple Heart for wounds received in action. Old Faithful survived 2 beach landings, Guadalcanal and Bougainville. It served as a command car for 4 different Marine generals. After 18 months and 11,000 miles of jungle terrain, It was retired in December 1943. It spent the rest of the war on display during war bond tours, the first American vehicle ever decorated with a Purple Heart. A Jeep. Japanese tactical doctrine had no answer for this level of mobility. Their defensive positions were designed to stop infantry advancing on foot. Americans arrived in jeeps, deployed machine guns or mortars, engaged from unexpected angles, then departed before Japanese forces could organize effective counterfire. Lieutenant Colonel Kiyono Ichiki, commanding Japanese forces at the Battle of the Tenaru River in August 1942, wrote before his death, "American forces possess mobility that renders our defensive calculations meaningless. They appear where vehicles should not be able to go. This is problematic for our tactical doctrine." Ichiki's entire force was annihilated at the Tenaru River. American forces used jeep-mounted machine guns to enfilade Japanese positions from multiple angles simultaneously. The pattern repeated across the Pacific, New Guinea, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Everywhere American forces landed, jeeps arrived in the first waves. And everywhere jeeps arrived, tactical possibilities expanded. The final accounting, May 7, 1945. Reims, France. General Alfred Jodl signed the unconditional surrender of German armed forces. In the aftermath, U.S. Army historians interviewed captured German generals about Allied equipment and tactics. The interviews revealed something remarkable. These generals, who had commanded panzer divisions, who had fought across Europe and Africa, who had faced every weapon in the Allied arsenal, consistently identified one piece of equipment above all others: the Jeep. Not American tanks, which they respected but considered inferior to German designs. Not American artillery, which they acknowledged was well organized but not technically superior. Not American aircraft, which impressed them but weren't decisive alone. The Jeep. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, when asked what single piece of Allied equipment most impressed him, answered without hesitation, "The American quarter-ton truck. You call it a Jeep. It gave your forces mobility and flexibility that we could not match. Every American soldier seemed to have access to motorized transport. This created a tempo of operations we could not sustain." The statistics supported von Rundstedt's assessment. Total Jeep production, 647,925 units from 1940 to 1945. German Kübelwagen production, 50,500 units. A production ratio of nearly 13 to 1. But it wasn't just quantity, it was how the vehicles were used. German doctrine concentrated vehicles at higher command levels. Battalion and regimental commanders had vehicles. Company and platoon commanders generally didn't. American doctrine pushed vehicles down to the lowest tactical levels. Company commanders had jeeps. Platoon leaders often had access to jeeps. Forward observers, medical personnel, communications teams, all equipped with jeeps. This created a fundamental asymmetry in operational tempo. American units could move, communicate, supply, and evacuate casualties faster than German units of equivalent size. The Jeep's versatility was documented in official U.S. Army reports: reconnaissance vehicle, command post, ambulance, weapons platform for machine guns, mortars, and even recoilless rifles, artillery tractor pulling 37mm anti-tank guns and 105mm howitzers, communications hub with radio equipment, supply vehicle towing trailers, wire-laying vehicle for communications, generator platform, searchlight carrier, railway vehicle when fitted with special wheels, amphibious vehicle when modified as the GPA SEEP. No other vehicle in military history had been adapted to so many roles so successfully. General George C. Marshall, U.S. Army Chief of Staff, stated flatly, "The Jeep is America's greatest contribution to modern warfare." General Dwight D. Eisenhower listed 4 tools that won World War II: the Jeep, the Dakota C-47 transport, the bulldozer, and the 2.5-ton truck. War correspondent Ernie Pyle, who followed American forces across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and the Pacific, wrote, "Good Lord, I don't think we could continue the war without the Jeep. It did everything. It went everywhere. Was as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, and as agile as a goat. It constantly carried twice what it was designed for and still kept going." The engineering triumph. The Jeep succeeded because American engineers understood a principle that German engineers missed. Optimization for specific conditions creates vulnerability. Optimization for all conditions creates resilience. The Kübelwagen was optimized for specific terrain. Lightweight for sand and snow, air-cooled engine for desert heat, simple mechanics for field repair. In those specific conditions, it often outperformed the Jeep. But the Jeep was optimized for universal adaptability, 4-wheel drive for any terrain, powerful engine for any load, strong frame for any punishment, simple mechanics for any repair situation. When conditions matched Kübelwagen optimization, it excelled. When conditions didn't match, it struggled. The Jeep didn't excel in any specific condition, but it succeeded in every condition. That trade-off, universal competence over specialized excellence, reflected American industrial philosophy. Build vehicles that work everywhere. Build enough of them that you can afford to lose some. Build them simply enough that anyone can repair them. Build them flexibly enough that soldiers can adapt them to unexpected needs. The numbers proved the philosophy correct. Cost per unit: Jeep 738.74, Kübelwagen approximately 1,100, accounting for currency conversion and inflation. Production rate: Jeep 1 every 90 seconds at peak, Kübelwagen significantly slower due to complex assembly. Service life: Jeeps routinely operated for 18 to 24 months in combat conditions without major overhauls. Operational availability: American units reported 85–90% of Jeeps operational at any given time. And most telling of all, captured Jeeps. German forces captured approximately 15,000 Jeeps during the war. They incorporated them into their own operations immediately. Wehrmacht regulations required captured vehicles to be reported for redistribution. But commanders routinely hid captured Jeeps from higher headquarters because they were too valuable to surrender. In March 1945, an American armored column advancing through Germany encountered a German supply convoy attempting to retreat. Among the German vehicles, 7 Jeeps. 5 were modified with German radio equipment. 2 mounted German machine guns. All bore German military markings. The German officer commanding the convoy, when interrogated, explained simply, "Your Jeeps are better than our vehicles. We use them whenever we can capture them. Every commander wants them. There are never enough." Soldat. Legacy. The Jeep proved that industrial warfare isn't just about quality. It's about the marriage of adequate quality with overwhelming quantity and universal adaptability. Germany produced superior tanks, the Tiger, the Panther, but they produced too few, too late, too complex to maintain. Germany produced excellent aircraft, the Me-262 jet fighter, but they couldn't produce enough to matter. Germany produced capable vehicles, the Kübelwagen, but they couldn't match the Jeep's combination of capability, reliability, and sheer numbers. American industrial philosophy won because it understood a crucial principle. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. And good enough, produced in massive quantities, deployed with tactical flexibility, defeats perfect produced in limited numbers. The Jeep embodied that principle. It wasn't the lightest vehicle. It wasn't the fastest vehicle. It wasn't the most fuel-efficient vehicle. It wasn't the most technically sophisticated vehicle, but it could do more things, in more places, under more conditions, with more reliability than any other vehicle in the war. 647, 925 jeeps. Every theater of war, every type of terrain, every tactical role, General Eisenhower placed it in his triumvirate of victory alongside the C-47 and landing craft. Marshal Zhukov relied on them to coordinate Soviet offensives. Field Marshal Montgomery used them to defeat Rommel in North Africa. General Patton raced across France in one. Marines earned Purple Hearts for them. German generals coveted them. Oberst Werner Marcks, who laughed at the Jeep in July 1942, died trying to escape in one in October 1942. His final diary entry, found on his body: "I was wrong about the American vehicle. It is crude, but it is effective. Brutally, relentlessly effective." German troops came to believe that every American soldier had his own Jeep. They didn't. But the belief reflected reality. Americans had so many Jeeps that it seemed like every soldier had access to one. And that access, that universal motorization, gave American forces a tempo advantage that German forces could never match. The Jeep crossed battlefields that no other vehicle could cross. It performed roles that no other vehicle could perform. It enabled tactics that no other vehicle could enable. In the end, it wasn't about horsepower or weight or technical sophistication. It was about a vehicle that worked, everywhere, always, without fail. German officers laughed at the Jeep in 1942. By 1945, they were fighting wars to capture them. That transformation from mockery to desperation tells you everything you need to know. The Jeep didn't just cross the battlefield, it changed the battlefield. Forever. 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 Forever.